In the chaos of a collapsing empire, a new force was born. August 1945, Japan surrenders, and across the Indonesian archipelago, a power vacuum ignites a revolution armed with little more than determination, improvised weapons, and a burning desire for freedom. Young fighters rise to defend a fragile declaration of independence. From these desperate beginnings emerged the Indonesian National Armed Forces. Not a formal army at first, but a patchwork of militias, former soldiers, and ordinary citizens turned warriors. They faced overwhelming odds, better equipped enemies, internal divisions, and the uncertainty of a nation still being born. So how did this ragtag force transform into the backbone of a new republic? And what did it take to turn revolution into independence? It was August 15th, 1945. Japan surrendered and the Second World War in Asia was over. Yet, Indonesian nationalists made themselves ready for a new fight, a new war, a war of decolonization. On August 17th, Indonesian nationalist leaders declared the Republic of Indonesia. Yet, with the British and later Dutch about to invade, the new republic needed an army. The Republican government exercised only limited authority over events across its vast territories and lacked a centralized structure. The Indonesian Armed Forces underwent reform after reform. The first name was the TKR, or People's Security Army, was founded on the 5th of October 1945. In theory, this established a national army with a hierarchical chain of command. Java, the heart of the revolution, was divided into 3 territorial commands, comprising 10 divisions in total, while Sumatra formed a separate command with 6 divisions. In reality, however, this structure quickly proved ineffective. The authority of the 3 territorial commanders in Java was often ignored by their subordinates. Centrally appointed divisional commanders were frequently rejected, and the planned development of divisions never properly materialized. Even the army commander's position reflected this lack of discipline. On the 12th of November 1945, Commander General Sudirman was elected TKR Supreme Commander by some regional officers. On the 26th of January 1946, the army was reorganized as the Tentara Republik Indonesia, TRI, or the Army of the Republic of Indonesia. In practice, this reorganization created 2 rival chains of command, one under Defense Minister Sudirman and another under General Sudirman. The number of divisions was reduced to 7 on Java and 3 on Sumatra. Syarifudin's appointment marked the beginning of a prolonged struggle between civilian leaders and the military. He advocated for an army shaped by democratic socialist principles, representing the people's desire for independence, yet remaining subordinate to the government. Sudirman, however, did not view himself as subordinate to civilian authority, but rather as an equal partner. He also opposed the government's policy of negotiating with the Dutch. On the 5th of May 1947, the TRI was renamed the Tentara Nasional Indonesia, TNI, Indonesian National Army. This reorganization aimed to merge non-state armed groups into a single national force. However, the situation shifted dramatically 2 months later when the Dutch launched Operation Product, gaining the upper hand. Under the subsequent Renville Agreement, TNI forces were required to withdraw from West and East Java into a much smaller Central Java, which lacked resources to sustain them. Given the changing territorial situation, military strategy was revised by a group of former KNL-trained officers under Sudirman's capable deputy, Colonel Abdul Haris Nasution. Nasution proposed shifting from a conventional warfare model, supplemented by guerrilla tactics, to a fully developed guerrilla strategy based on the 3 classic Maoist stages. The first phase would be defensive, focusing on survival and securing logistical support. In the second phase, guerrilla units would grow in size and begin to launch targeted attacks on Dutch convoys and positions, capturing weapons and equipment. Once this phase produced a stalemate, a third offensive stage would follow, in which guerrilla forces would evolve into a regular army capable of achieving a conventional victory. Nasution envisioned dividing the TNI into territorial and mobile forces modeled on the German system. Territorial units would establish local defensive pockets in Dutch-occupied regions, relying on village networks and maintaining parallel administrative structures to preserve the shadow Republican government. At the same time, mobile units would carry out offensive operations against economic and military targets, using hit-and-run tactics against towns and supply lines. The former Indonesian officers who had served under the Japanese made up the core of the Republican Army. This officer corps, trained by the Japanese, had been organized along territorial lines and was primarily experienced in small unit operations, usually at the level of companies or, at most, battalions. Most advanced military education came from ex-KNL officers, which further deepened the divide between the higher command structure and local field commanders. Standardized uniforms only appeared later in the conflict. Initially, the Indonesian fighters made use of what was available, and this was mostly Japanese. Some soldiers had Japanese boots, other ankle boots with puttees, and others walked on their bare feet. Later captured Dutch uniforms can be spotted also. The weaponry was varied as well, but it consisted mainly of Japanese arms and what had been captured or surrendered. Think of the Type 89 machine gun, the Type 92 heavy machine gun, Arisaka rifle, Nambu pistol, and military swords, the gunto. These were widely used along with pre-war KNL stockpile that had previously been seized by the Japanese. Think of the Hamburg carbine, for example. At the outset, this included not only small arms, but also some artillery pieces and light armored vehicles, although most of these heavier assets were lost during the period of 1945-46. Isolated from consistent foreign sources of weapons and ammunition, the nationalists were forced to depend largely on equipment captured from Dutch forces, which occurred only irregularly. As a consequence, shortages of arms, ammunition, and reliable communication systems became a critical weakness in the Indonesian struggle. In December 1948, according to Dutch intelligence, only 40 to 50% of the TNI on Java were armed, and on Sumatra, about 25%. A Sumatran battalion of 800 to 900 men had only 100 to 200 rifles or carbines, 4 to 6 light machine guns, and 1 or 2 heavy machine guns and mortars. Artillery was now limited to a section of 2 pieces in one regiment. Ammunition was often limited, and communications relied on civilian telephones or couriers. Moreover, individual and unit combat training was often rudimentary. Dutch forces generally held a low opinion of the Republican Army's combat effectiveness, due in part to its limited weaponry. The Dutch commander, Lieutenant General Spoor, whose career had been rooted in the Dutch colonial army, the KNL, and who was influenced by prevalent colonial attitudes, did not regard General Sudirman's forces as a conventional army. Instead, he viewed them as a loosely organized military network intended to coordinate various armed groups. Overall, total Republican strength during this period was estimated at 118,145 troops on Java and 41,800 on Sumatra, giving a combined force of 159,955 soldiers, not including the separate militias. Believe it or not, the Republic of Indonesia also had a small air force and navy. The Republican Air Force was initially made up of a small number of captured Japanese aircraft. At the outset, this included 2 fighter planes, 3 light bombers, 4 transport aircraft, and several trainer planes. On the 9th of April, 1946, it was officially established as a separate branch of the armed forces. However, it faced major limitations in both personnel and equipment. There were very few trained pilots or skilled maintenance crews, and spare parts were in short supply. During Operation Product in July-August 1947, Dutch forces destroyed 24 aircraft while they were still on the ground. The Republican Navy also remained a relatively small and modest force. It consisted of a limited number of small vessels, along with several battalions that were deployed for land-based combat operations. Dutch sources estimated its total strength at around 15,000 personnel. Despite the odds, the Indonesian nationalists did prevail. In 1949, the Dutch transferred sovereignty to the Republic of Indonesia. Yet, this Indonesian victory wasn't achieved on the battlefield alone. Some even claim the Dutch could have won this conflict, but politicians were to blame for their loss. To what extent that is true, you'll find that out by clicking here. Thanks for watching.